Nazi scientists into their new program, the MKultra program, okay? Now, this is the Central Intelligence Agency's program. It says potential new agent for unconventional warfare, lysergic acid diethylamide, okay? You see, it says lysergic acid diethylamide, LSD.
I know a lot of them for NASA. Why do you know how many people?
Yeah, a lot of these Nazi scientists were taken into NASA. This guy named Strughold is a famous top rocket scientist. It was a Nazi, former Nazi, and a lot of them were brought into the MKultra program, and they brought in that philosophy. Okay, so LSD became one of their top weapons in the MKultra program. When they tested, I'll show you, 24 or more different drugs were tested on 1,000 Edward Arsenal soldiers. And those drugs were tested on them to see how they can use them in warfare. Now when we think of how they use drugs in warfare, we think on the battlefield, somewhere else, in a foreign country. But what we don't realize is the battlefield is also right here in America against dissenters. Anyone who dissents against their racist policies, against their, exploitive policies, their hyper-capitalist policies, is considered an opponent, someone who they've got to stop. And now I'm going to show how they use all these different drugs as weapons against dissent in this country. Now, this is Project MKultra, the CIA's program of research and behavioral modification. Okay, and this is a joint hearing from the Subcommittee on Intelligence, Subcommittee on Health and Scientific Research. The Senate Church Committee looked at and researched and checked out MKultra, and they came out with some stuff about it, but just not enough, because the CIA director, Richard Helms, shredded tens of thousands, really hundreds of thousands of documents. The only way we found out about MKultra is they went to the finance department and they uncovered the documents there, where he didn't realize that he needed to shred the papers in the finance department. So 30,000 papers are still there in the finance department on how this all worked. Okay. This is Alan Dulles. He was one of the lawyers. Him and his brother were some of the lawyers for the Rockefellers and J.P. Morgan interests. Who were the original eugenicists I told you about, who were the wealthiest, whose families went all the way back to the Opium trafficking, way back. Okay. Dulles was the longest-running CIA director, and was a major, leader of MKultra in terms of championing it. Okay, this is Nasser of Egypt. Okay, what happened was MKultra decided to develop a hit list of dosing different world leaders with LSD. Nasser was one of them. This is Sidney Gottlieb, who headed the MKultra program. This is Che Guevara and Fidel Castro. They were on that hit list to be dosed with LSD. This is Patrice Lumumba. Now Sidney Gottlieb, the head of MKultra, according to the documents I have, which shows it right here, says Richard Bissell says, directed by Richard Bissell, assumed responsibility for a project involving the assassination of Patrice Lumumba. Okay? Says instructed to see Dr. Sidney Gottlieb in order to procure the appropriate vehicle. Okay? Gottlieb, head of MKultra, under the CIA's MKultra program. This is a document showing that he was involved in Patrice Lumumba's assassination. Okay? Patrice Lumumba was the first independence leader of the Congo. Okay? And that's some of what was going on. That's how they were using this MKultra program, using the drugs to control the world. Okay? Now, remember before I was telling you about China and how there was the Opium Wars in China. Now, if you look at this is basically the southwestern part of China. It's right there. That is called they call the Golden Triangle. Okay, that is the top area to produce poppies. It was very important to the oligarchs to control that area, and that's where Vietnam is. So, what's right there? Afghanistan. the other best place to grow poppies and produce opium and produce heroin. What were the two longest wars in this country's history? Can anyone guess?
Vietnam and whatever we want to call this war we're still in right now.
Vietnam and Afghanistan, right. That is not a coincidence. You can say it's a coincidence, but I argue no. The reason those are the two longest wars in American history is because that's where the poppies are. That's where they get the most opiates. And they can just funnel those opiates into our communities and ruin our communities with heroin addiction. They can funnel them into painkillers to get people in the painkillers and then on the heroin with the heroin problem, with the opiate problem. And that's one of the ways MKultra works. It uses opium as one of its top drugs. It uses as a weapon against us. That's very sad. Yeah. That's horrible. Yeah, just so many people dying from heroin.
Dope affects everybody.
Sure does. It affects the whole community. It affects everyone around you. Now, as strange as it seems, I do have Elvis in here. Why do I have Elvis in here? Because he was the first top musician and he developed a drug problem very quickly. Now, what they want you to think, what the MKultra scientists and the oligarchs want you to think by controlling the media is they want you to think, oh, it's just natural for musicians to go to drugs. Nah, it's not. It's not natural for any of us to go to drugs. They've cultivated this. How they cultivated with him? He was 20 years old when he became a national figure, Elvis. And what was, people say, oh, but he's no activist. He desegregated. He solo, his own way. He went to black shows and just heralded the great black musicians. And these are the kings of rock and roll. These are the best singers in the world. And then he copied them to say, these are the best singers in the world. He copied them, yeah, of course. He tried to copy their style, and he kept saying, no, I'm not the king of rock and roll. People like, Bo Diddley's the king of rock and roll, and all these other great black singers are the kings of rock and roll. So what they do at 21 years old, he couldn't handle all his pain. So they put this guy on him. They said, oh, this guy comes in his life and says, I can handle all your fame, I can get you all your concerts. They were actually banning Elvis from loads of cities. They were banning him from the radio. Kids would throw rocks through windows with notes on them saying, you better play Elvis or we'll tear this town up. Okay? This guy, he gets him on the radio. He gets him in these concert places after they tried to ban him. And he starts giving him speed and downers. Constant speed and downers. This was in 1956, Colonel Tom Parker. Okay? He was a colonel in the reserves. And the question...
The other thing about him is that he was an illegal alien. People don't know that about him.
I didn't know that about him.
He was an illegal alien from the Netherlands, and that's why Elvis never toured. He's the only serious American rock and roller who never went abroad. Never. Because Tom Parker wouldn't leave his side, and Tom Parker couldn't get a passport.
It's interesting, I didn't know that about him. That's maybe one of the ways they control Tom Parker more.
Maybe.
There's a chain of control.
But
Sure.
Elvis, it's the biggest secret. It's the biggest open secret.
Right.
He never toured any place else but the United States.
That's interesting.
Never.
Yeah, didn't know that.
That's why when he got drafted, to the Army, he actually went to the Army.
Yeah.
He could have been like the performing fleet and been in what they call the special services.
Right.
And like gone and performed for the soldiers. But Tom Parker wouldn't allow it because if he did, then his voice would become the property of the Army while he was in the service, and Tom Parker didn't want to allow it.
Okay. Well, I argue, my contention is that when he was taken to the Army to control him, because John Lennon, when Elvis died in the mid to late 70s, everyone was hounding John Lennon. What do you think about Elvis's death? What do you think about Elvis's death? He says, Elvis died when he went to the Army in 1958. He said after that he was just living dead. Because he was on so much speed and so many downers. And then when he went to Germany, Germany was a center, a foreign center for MKultra operations. The operations in Germany were so bad that MKultra scientists tried to quit the CIA because they were so sickened by what they saw in Germany, what was going on in Germany. A guy named Olsen tried to quit the CIA, and they threw him out of a 10th floor window. Okay? First they dosed him with LSD to see what he was, going to rattle and how he might rattle him or not. And then when they couldn't get much out of him, they threw him out of the window.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm going to attribute it to the drugs, but Elvis has never been somebody that I looked up to. I've never been a fan of his. And I know later in life,
He was a robot.
attribute it to the drugs.
Yeah.
He said the only thing that a black man was good for was to buy his records and to shine his shoes. He didn't recognize all of the artists that he stole from. How he jacked up the culture.
I think he did early on, but then he was so controlled after that.
He got a special rule from Muhammad Ali was he made personally for him. Later on he did.
I think at first he did, but when they turned him into a robot, I think it was all different. So I can agree with you that later on they probably turned him into a racist
I'm a
robot.
boxer. In October I went to the Olympic trials in Memphis. And that's where he's from, Memphis or Nashville, whatever. We went to Graceland down there. And I didn't want to be there just because of all the stories I heard about Elvis growing up.
I understand.
My coach wanted us to go and see where Elvis was, and the Lisa Marie, this big jet and all that. I wanted to go to the National Civil Rights Museum where Dr. King was assassinated.
Oh, sure, that's
and we went there too. Drug him there.
Yeah, so thanks for telling me about that there. But I mean, he started out heralding these great black singers, and then he turned into a racist robot after that. And Nixon's puppet too, right? So here's just the first. 1956 was one of the first documents.
Can you hold questions till after?
Oh, sure.
Because, each thing that you go into, we all got something we want to say.
No problem.
Yeah, we be here all night.
If you could.
Okay, thanks, man. Thanks, man. I'll do that. Okay, guys. Now, there is a time limit, guys. So thanks, Pam, for helping with that. So, guys, afterwards I will answer lots of questions here. I'll stay for a while. I'll stay for at least an hour. Okay. How you doing? So, grab a seat if you like too. Okay. Guys, this is Paul Robeson. He was arguably one of the most incredible men in world history. He knew over 20 different languages. He went to Columbia Law School when they probably let only one black person in, really in 10 years. Well, he was a star football player. He was a star lacrosse player. He was just a renaissance man. And of course, he was the best singer in the world at that time. He was known as the best singer in the world.
I'm sorry. You said Columbia. Did you do a graduate at Columbia? Because I know you went to Rutgers.
Yeah, you graduated from Rutgers undergrad and then Columbia Law School. Yeah. So he was a great voice for all workers. As you can see, all the workers around him, listening to him. These are a bunch of union workers. He was an incredible activist. And what happened to him, sadly enough, I'll get back to MLK in a minute. But what happened to Robeson is he was targeted by MKultra. Paul Robeson Jr. says they put basically some Americans in the Soviet Union dosed his drink with an incredible amount of psychedelics. It made him not know what was going on. Since 1961, no one knew about psychedelics. He thought he was losing his mind. His son was already an adult, came over to find out what's going on with his father, and they dosed him too. And when he came down, he tried to get his father out of there. They dosed them again. Then they convinced him he needs to go into a hospital. Once in the hospital, they gave him up to 50 electroshock treatments and super high doses to mess his brain up. And Paul Robeson did not want to be remembered that way in history, so he became a recluse for the next 15 years. But what they did is they took him out of his great activism. He was supposed to meet up with Che Guevara and Fidel Castro 2 weeks from that time of his first dosing. And the Bay of Pigs was supposed to happen around that same time, the invasion of Cuba. So they obviously wanted to take him out from getting in the way of that invasion of Cuba. It's very sad. He was an incredible man. But we still have his memory before the dosing, but since then we didn't have him for another 15 years. This is MLK. Robeson was organizing, going back to the country and organize more with MLK, as was Richard Wright, another great writer and activist. And of course, Richard Wright's daughter Julia Wright works with Pam on the Freedom of Media campaign in Europe. Now, this is Professor Professor Timothy Leary from Harvard. And you guys may have heard of him. This is William Mellon Hitchcock. Okay? Mellon, you might have heard the name Mellon, comes from Mellon Bank. Mellon comes from Carnegie Mellon University. The Mellons and the Hitchcocks also own Gulf Oil. That is how wealthy this family is. They were at top posts in U.S. and British intelligence. Okay? That's who supported Timothy Leary. Okay? He basically gave Timothy Leary his mansion in just an hour north of New York. Gave him like Captain Al Hubbard, I showed you before, to do that, to get people to use LSD. Okay, this is the free speech campaign in Berkeley. Now Berkeley had a bunch of great civil rights activists too. A lot of people from Berkeley joined Freedom Summer down the civil rights area. Okay, and Mario Salvo was one of them. He headed the free speech campaign in Berkeley. They were involved in anti-war activism and all kinds of stuff. So what happens next around that area? You get Ken Kesey, the next guru for LSD, popping up. Okay? And he starts what I call MKultra West, the acid test. I don't know if you guys have ever heard the acid test before, but the acid tests were big parties that got bigger and bigger and lured people in to drink their punch and listen to their music. And when they listened to music and dance and then had some punch, some knew, but many didn't know that they were getting dosed with LSD and messing up their heads. This is Can You Pass the Acid Test? It's some of the flyers for it. And I call this AstroTurf campaign propaganda. They pretend like it's a grassroots event, but it's really, there were a number of CIA MKultra scientists who attended. MKultra scientists attended these acid tests. A guy named John Gittinger was the highest level psychologist in the MKultra program. In a legal deposition, he said, me and two other scientists were at least several of these acid tests. Okay? They pretended like they were grassroots little parties, but they were really run by the CIA, I argue. This is important because who's this? Does anyone recognize this guy? Jerry Garcia, the Grateful Dead? Okay? Does everyone know that the biggest place to get LSD is a Grateful Dead concert? And the biggest distributors is the Grateful Dead? That's an MKultra operation there, it seems to be. That's how they distribute LSD the best. Who's this guy? This guy's name, they called him Owsley. Pretend like he was just some random guy that popped up to be the top LSD dealer in the country. His real name is Augustus Owsley Stanley III. Okay? Owsley, his name Owsley is the name of a county in Kentucky, because his family basically owned that county. Okay? His family's senators and governors and all of Kentucky. That's where he comes from. He was producing speed, he was producing acid, he was in the army before he started producing all that and was supposed to be some hippie king, you know? He was in the army for a while, and then all of a sudden some hippie king scientist producing all these MKultra drugs. He's supplying the acid tests, and there's the MKultra scientist hanging out the acid tests. John Gittinger, who said, I told you, said I was in the legal deposition, I was at these acid tests with the other scientists. Now here is the four great leaders of the 1960s who we lost, very sadly. JFK, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, and Robert F. Kennedy in that order. Malcolm X arguably held the first and big, demonstration against the Vietnam War. He was a leading opposition to the Vietnam War. He also helped people get sober up and get away from drugs in the Nation of Islam, and in his next group, the Organization of African-American Unity, Afro-American Unity. They didn't want him opposing the Vietnam War. JFK was a major opponent of the Vietnam War at the very end of his life. He was a major anti-nuclear activist by the very end of his life. He was changing, and they did him in. Martin Luther King, when a year, like in 1967, I think it was April 3rd, 1967, he came out against the Vietnam War. Exactly 1 year later, he was assassinated. I show that's not a coincidence. William Pepper, his good friend, who became an attorney and a professor in Oxford, wrote some excellent books like Orders to Kill and Act of State, and represented the King family in court, proving, and the jury found that he proved that the U.S. government played a part in his assassination. And why? I think it was partly because of his opposition to the Vietnam War. What did they have so against his opposition? Why were they so against his stance on the Vietnam War? Because he was so influential by that point, and they wanted those to control the poppy fields. They wanted control of the heroin-producing areas. And then, of course, there's RFK. Now, RFK not only started to oppose the Vietnam War, but the guy who was involved in his assassination, Sirhan, was on psychohypnotic drugs at the time of his being involved in RFK's assassination. Those psychohypnotic drugs were used with hypnosis to make him part of, as a patsy, as part of the assassination of RFK. Okay, those were MKultra drugs, and that hypnosis was developed in the MKultra program. Here's some documents that show more about that. I have in my book. Here is a nationalist Chinese general who says, we have to continue to fight the evil of communism, and the fight must have an army, and an army must have guns, and to buy guns you must have money. In these mountains, the only money is opium, he says. This is published in 1967.
Everybody is saying that you have to vote for Hillary, and she's in the pocket of all those banks you just listed on your screen.
Not everybody's saying.
Right.
Everybody's saying.
One question about
Because I'm holding my black vote. And I'm getting
Crisis
my vote.
actors, no
I don't have a
doubt.
contract.
David McGowan, his book I showed, Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon, did a great expose of the crisis actors.
You see the same photos all the time.
Yeah.
You can see how well the masses are brainwashed. They're the same people from every state. And me, I do a little research. You can literally go on government agencies and find that ISIS is a government organization. It shows that.
There
You
seems
can
to be
find.
evidence to that
Well,
effect, yeah.
I went to the website. It says a completely different thing than the media. It says defense, and they're a defense organization, and they have accounts all over the Middle East.
It's
So
because
this is what's going on to the government sites. I'm just looking at these frauds. Anything that has anything that says government.
But guys, I'm gonna try to stick. There's so many topics we could go on to, but I'm gonna try to stick to this topic. Okay. So, any other questions before we wrap things up?
How much did you write about rap music and the Mali and all that?
My first book is called The FBI War on Tupac Shakur and Black Leaders, and it's much more about the rap industry and rappers and how when they tried to get activists, they were targeted, and so some were scared off from activism after that, or scared off from the level of activism. Others obviously were killed, others were manipulated, but we still have some good activist rappers, obviously. With the drugs, I have a few chapters on that, on the way, what's happening in the rap industry, and the way they brought Molly in, and the way they created, for example, Fizz Entertainment, which is a slang for ecstasy, and it turns out federal agents were part of Fizz for years, many years, turned into a national, entertainment industry.
How did you get your information? Like what is it that sparked you to take on this topic? And how do you get your information? And the people that you show who are ex-CIA agents, are they still living? Have they been thrown off group?
I don't know what's happened to John Stockwell. I met him in 1990. I saw a video of him earlier. I haven't seen older video of him. So I don't know where he is now. I met him at a conference in 1990. In 1989, I started working as a drug and alcohol counselor. And I started hearing things and seeing things. Before that, about 6 months, I was a parole probation officer. And I heard many things. Before that, I worked in a bar where I heard all kinds of trafficking going on and crazy corruption things. Before that, my grandfather was a Marxist lawyer who told me all kinds of things that were going on behind the scenes. So I accumulated all of that to say I got to start talking to people and interviewing them and tell people about this and all this corruption I'm seeing and hearing about. And so that's when I started going to conferences and met John Stockwell and told me what he was doing. I just talked to him after we were done talking at the conference, and he told me directly, he said, more stuff. And my drug dealers who I was counseling, they told me all kinds of stuff over the years, the last 27 years, you know. And I just cold called, you know, Michael Warren, for example, to box the trial lawyer in 1970, I mean, in 2000.